Murder on the Last Train to Prague, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Chapter 1. The Compartment of Quiet Storms. The Edelweiss Express departed Vienna's Westbahnhof at precisely 11:47 in the evening, 13 minutes behind schedule, a fact that deeply unsettled Hercule Poirot, who stood upon the platform in his perfectly brushed overcoat and regarded the locomotive with an expression of mild reproach. 13 minutes, he murmured to himself, smoothing one gloved hand along the brass rail as he mounted the steps. An inauspicious number and an inauspicious beginning. The journey to Prague was one Poirot had not planned. He had been in Vienna, attending a conference on criminological methodology, as a guest lecturer rather than a student, naturally, and had intended to fly directly to London. But a telephone call from an old acquaintance, a certain Dr. Eric Vanbury of Charles University, had altered his arrangements. Vanbury had been vague, almost evasive, speaking in half-sentences about a matter of considerable delicacy that required Poirot's particular genius. The word genius had been deployed with flattering precision. Poirot was not immune to it, and so he found himself aboard the Edelweiss Express on a Thursday in late October, the world outside the window black and gleaming with recent rain. The train was not crowded. It was, in fact, uncommonly select. The sleeping car assigned to Poirot, Car D, the second from the rear, contained only 8 occupied compartments, and the passengers, he noted as he made his careful way along the corridor, represented a curious assortment of individuals. From compartment 1 came the low, taut murmur of a couple arguing in German, the words just below comprehension, but the emotional temperature unmistakable. A woman's voice, clipped and controlled, a man's, defending something. Compartment 3 was occupied by a large man in a tweed suit who sat with his legs crossed and a whiskey glass balanced on his knee, staring at nothing with the deliberate vacancy of a man who has trained himself not to think. He had the ruddy complexion of the English outdoorsman and the eyes of someone considerably more calculating than his posture suggested. Compartment 5 was dark, the blind drawn, no sound whatsoever from within. From compartment 6, as Poirot passed, emerged a brief fragment of violin music, someone humming to themselves a phrase from Dvorak, then stopping abruptly, as though embarrassed to have been heard. Compartment 7 was occupied by a young woman of perhaps 26, seated ramrod straight, with a leather-bound notebook open on her knee, writing with furious concentration. She did not look up as Poirot passed, and he did not disturb her, but he noted the ink stain on her left forefinger and the dark circles beneath eyes that were, otherwise, quite beautiful. Compartment 8, his own, awaited him at the end of the corridor. He settled himself with his characteristic precision, coat hung, bag stowed. His small leather travelling case opened upon the seat beside him, with its contents arranged in exactly the sequence he would require them. His herbal tisane, his notebook, his 2 volumes of Immanuel Kant, neither of which he would open, but which served as useful ballast in any intellectual emergency. The train gathered speed through the outer suburbs of Vienna. Rain streaked the window in long silver threads. Poirot sat back, crossed his ankles, and permitted himself the rare luxury of unstructured thought. He was reflecting upon the conversation with Vanbury, trying to extract from the doctor's circumlocutions some concrete sense of what troubled him, when the dining-car steward knocked and informed him that dinner would be served until 1 in the morning, and that the bar car remained open. "The other passengers," Poirot said pleasantly, "are they dining tonight?" "Most of them, sir. We have a rather interesting group this evening." The steward, a thin young Czech named André, consulted his mental catalogue with professional discretion. The Hartmann party from compartments 1 and 2, that is Mr. and Mrs. Hartmann, and Mrs. Hartmann's brother, Mr. Fedor Bloom, in 2. The gentleman in 3 is a Mr. Douglas Ferris, English. Compartment 5 is Colonel Anselm Roth, retired. He boarded at the last moment and has asked not to be disturbed. Compartment 6 is a Madame Celestine Duroc, French, a musician. And Compartment 7 is Miss Adela Novotna, she's Czech, a journalist. And my own compartment makes 8, Poirot said. Yes, sir. Will you be joining the others for dinner? I think, Poirot said thoughtfully, that I shall. The dining car was warmly lit, with cream-coloured tablecloths and small lamps encased in amber glass that gave the room the feel of an Edwardian drawing room, transported by some eccentric millionaire onto rails. Poirot was shown to a table near the centre, from which he could observe all other diners without appearing to do so, an arrangement he considered among life's modest perfections. The Hartmans sat at the far end, a man of about 50, silver-haired and lean, with the careful grooming of someone who had worked hard to look aristocratic. His wife, Ilse, was younger by perhaps 15 years, a handsome woman with pale blonde hair and cheekbones of sculptural precision, who sat with her back to the window and said almost nothing. Between them, yet somehow apart from them, was Fedor Bloom, Ilse's brother, a soft-featured man of 35 who ate with evident pleasure and spoke with the lightly nervous enthusiasm of someone filling silence on behalf of others. Douglas Ferris sat alone, as Poirot himself did, and ordered steak with the confidence of a man who considered all other options theoretical. He caught Poirot's eye once, nodded with brief cordiality, and returned to his solitude. Madame Celestine Duroc arrived late, a woman of indeterminate age between 50 and 65, dressed in a wine-red jacket with a silk scarf at her throat. She had magnificent bone structure and the posture of someone who had once been on stage and never entirely left it. She ordered only soup and wine, and spent the meal gazing at the rain-streaked window with an expression of sustained melancholy. Miss Novotna did not come to the dining car at all. Of Colonel Roth there was no sign. Poirot ate his roast duck, competently prepared, he noted, and observed and listened, and said almost nothing to anyone. He was not yet investigating anything. He was simply watching, as one does in a theatre, before the curtain rises. By the time the train passed Brno and the dining car began to empty, Poirot had formed 3 tentative impressions: that the Hartmans despised one another with exquisite marital courtesy, that Douglas Ferris was watching the Hartmans when he believed no one was watching him, and that Madame Duroc, for all her apparent detachment, had flinched, just once, very slightly, when Fedor Bloom had laughed too loudly at something his own joke. These impressions meant nothing yet, but Hercule Poirot was a man who collected impressions the way others collected postage stamps, with patience, with system, and with the serene confidence that one day they would complete a picture. He ordered a second tisane, settled back, and waited for the night to produce its secrets. He did not wait long. Chapter 2. The Gentleman in Compartment 5. It was 20 minutes past 2 in the morning when the scream came. Poirot was not asleep. He had not expected to sleep. He had been sitting in his compartment with the small reading lamp illuminating his notebook, in which he had written, with his customary geometric neatness, the names of his fellow passengers, and beside each name a single word or phrase representing his first impression. Hartmann, Karl, performance. Hartmann, Ilse, endurance. Bloom, Fedor, anxiety. Ferris, Douglas, surveillance. Duroc, Celestine, grief. Novotna, Adela, purpose. Roth, Anselm, absence. That last entry had troubled him. A passenger who boarded a train and immediately withdrew from all human contact was either deeply exhausted or deeply troubled. Poirot did not know Colonel Roth, had never met him, had no reason to consider him extraordinary. Yet the word absence sat on the page with the uncomfortable specificity of a premonition. When the scream came, it was from a woman's voice, sharp, genuine, immediately cut off, and it came from the direction of Compartment 5. Poirot was on his feet and at the corridor door with a speed that would have surprised those who underestimated him on account of his age and fastidiousness. The corridor was empty. The train rocked steadily through the darkness of the Moravian countryside. He moved toward compartment 5, noting as he did so that the door of compartment 7 was open an inch. Miss Novotna, it seemed, was also not sleeping. The door to compartment 5 was closed but not locked. The blue sleeping light above the bunk was still on. Poirot knocked twice, briskly. No response. He opened the door. Celestine Duroc stood against the far wall of the compartment, with her hand pressed to her mouth, her silk scarf slightly askew, her eyes very wide and very fixed on the bunk to her left. She was trembling, not performatively, but with the fine, involuntary vibration of genuine shock. On the bunk, dressed in his sleeping clothes and with his hands folded with almost ecclesiastical precision upon his chest, lay a man of about 65, silver-grey hair, a full moustache, a face of considerable distinction, now arrested in a stillness that was, to Poirot's experienced eye, immediately and unambiguously final. Colonel Anselm Roth was dead. Poirot stepped into the compartment and examined the body without touching it, bending close, his dark eyes moving with swift and systematic attention. No visible wound, no disorder of the bedclothes, no glass, no bottle, no pill container on the small shelf above the bunk. The compartment was immaculate, almost aggressively so, as though the colonel had arranged it himself in expectation of exactly this scrutiny. "Madame," Poirot said quietly, turning to Celestine Duroc, "you screamed." Yes." Her voice was a trained instrument, even in shock. "I came to speak with him. I know it looks very wrong for me to be here at this hour, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I had to speak with him, and I knocked, and there was no answer, and the door was unlocked, and She stopped. "He is dead." "Yes," Poirot said. "He is dead." By now the corridor had acquired occupants. André the steward appeared, looking frightened and very young. Behind him, Douglas Ferris in his dressing gown, holding his whiskey glass with the disciplined calm of a soldier maintaining useful habits. Fedor Bloom, blinking and dishevelled. And at the very back, Karl Hartmann, fully dressed, which Poirot noted with quiet precision, standing very still with his hands clasped behind his back. "Someone should fetch the conductor," Poirot said pleasantly, "and no one should leave this car. Who are you to give orders?" Bloom asked, not aggressively but with the bewildered indignation of a man who needed the world to make sense. "I am," Poirot said, with modest composure, "Hercule Poirot." There was a small silence of the particular variety that his name occasionally produced. "The detective," Ferris said. "I prefer," Poirot replied, "the term investigator. It implies more deliberation." The conductor, a stout man named Bartosz, who had clearly never encountered a dead passenger before, arrived within 4 minutes and immediately proposed stopping the train at the next station to contact the Czech police. Poirot agreed that this was entirely proper and suggested in the meantime that the door to compartment 5 be closed and the corridor kept clear. He then drew Bartosz aside and spoke to him in a tone too low for others to hear. The compartment, Poirot said, was not locked from the inside. "No, sir." "And Colonel Roth boarded at the last moment, you said. Was he alone? Did anyone see him board?" Bartosz frowned. "He came just as the train was moving, sir. I didn't see him board myself. He was simply there when I came through for ticket inspection. And his ticket, first class, Vienna to Prague, paid in cash. No reservation. He was assigned compartment 5 as it was empty." "Cash," Poirot repeated softly. "How very interesting." He returned to his compartment and sat down and made several small additions to his notebook. His expression was that of a man to whom a conversation has just become considerably more absorbing than he had anticipated. The Edelweiss Express continued northeast through the darkness. Colonel Roth remained very still in compartment 5. And Hercule Poirot considered his little grey cells with an expression that, to those who knew him, would have been instantly recognizable as something between satisfaction and deep unease, the expression of a man who suspects that the thing before him is not what it appears to be, and who finds this suspicion simultaneously troubling and irresistible. He did not sleep. He was not meant to. Chapter 3. Poirot considers the architecture of accidents. The train reached the small station of Pardubice at 4:38 in the morning and sat upon the platform under a sky the colour of pewter, while 2 Czech police officers boarded with the cautious expressions of men summoned to something outside their usual experience. The senior officer was Inspector Karel Hluček, a compact, efficient man of about 45 with a clipped grey beard and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that urgency rarely improved outcomes. He shook Poirot's hand with the recognition of a professional encountering a name from the literature of his field, and immediately invited him to observe. The police surgeon, Dr. Marta Fischerova, arrived 20 minutes later by car and examined Colonel Roth with the thoroughness of someone who understood that in a case of this nature, the examination would be scrutinized by people considerably above her rank. She was a brisk woman who wore her intelligence lightly and her skepticism openly. "Natural causes are possible," she said, after 12 minutes with the body. "A man of his age, if he had cardiac history, possible." She paused. "But I do not like the colour of his lips, and I will want a full toxicology." "How long?" Poirot asked. 48 hours for preliminary. I can expedite." "Please do," Inspector Hluček said. Poirot stood at the doorway of compartment 5, while Fischerova worked, studying the scene with the patient, comprehensive attention of a man cataloguing an exhibition. The compartment told a story of order. The colonel's coat hung precisely, his shoes aligned beneath the bunk with military correctness. His single piece of luggage, a slim leather briefcase, stowed in the overhead rack. "The briefcase," Poirot said. Hluček opened it with gloved hands. Inside, a single envelope, sealed. A German-Czech dictionary. A folded map of Prague, with 3 locations marked in pencil. A hotel, a street address in the Malastrana district, and the central railway station. And a small photograph, unframed, of a woman of perhaps 40, dark-haired, standing in front of what appeared to be a garden wall somewhere in the south of France. No identification papers, no personal letters, no wallet, Poirot murmured. Hluček looked at him. "His wallet is not here," Poirot elaborated, "and yet his ticket was paid in cash. A man carries cash, therefore a man carries a wallet. Where is it?" "It could have been on his person," Hluček said, nodding toward the body. It was not. When Fischerova confirmed this with clinical brevity, the absence of the wallet acquired a sudden, uncomfortable significance. Poirot descended to the platform and walked its length slowly in the cold morning air, his breath visible before him, his hands clasped behind his back. The passengers of Car D had been asked to remain in their compartments, but through the windows he could see the yellow rectangles of light and, occasionally, the silhouette of someone moving, standing, sitting. He stopped beneath the window of compartment 7 and looked up. Miss Novotná was sitting precisely as she had been at dinner, upright, notebook open, writing. At this hour, after a death had been discovered 3 compartments away. Poirot found this interesting. He found Karl Hartmann interesting too. Hartmann had been fully dressed when he appeared in the corridor at 2:20 in the morning. Fully dressed, not in nightclothes, not in a hastily donned robe, but in his day clothes, as though he had never intended to sleep at all. A man who had not planned to sleep. Why? And Célestine Duroc, a woman who visited a man's compartment at 2 in the morning, claiming the necessity of conversation. What conversation? With whom? On what subject? The colonel had made no appearance at dinner, had refused to be disturbed, had given every indication of wishing to be invisible. And yet Madame Duroc had known precisely where he was. Poirot returned inside and asked André the steward, very quietly, whether any of the passengers had moved through the corridor between midnight and 2 in the morning, to his knowledge. André thought carefully. "I was in the service area from about midnight to 1, he said. "I saw Mr. Ferris go past, toward the bar car, I think, around 12:30, and," he hesitated, "I think I heard the door to compartment 1 open and close around 1 o'clock, but I didn't see who it was." "Compartment 1, Poirot said. "The Hartmans." "Yes, sir." Poirot thanked him with genuine warmth. He always meant his expressions of gratitude, which was why people consistently told him more than they intended to, and went to find Inspector Hluchek. "I would like," he said, "to speak with each of the passengers." "Not as part of your official inquiry, that is entirely your domain, mon ami, but a small, informal conversation. It is possible I may observe something that assists you." Hluchek, who had done his reading, said he would be grateful. The sealed envelope from Colonel Roth's briefcase was opened. It contained a single sheet of paper. On it, in a precise hand, were written 6 words in German, "Sie wissen, was Sie getan haben," which translated, with exact and unsettling simplicity, as, "They know what they have done." No signature, no addressee, no date. Poirot read it twice, folded it back into its envelope, which he did not touch with his bare hands, having borrowed gloves from Fischerova, and sat for a long moment in the empty dining car, which was being used as a temporary operations room, with a cup of extremely bad coffee before him, and the note's 6 words turning quietly in his mind. "They know what they have done. Not you know. Not he knows or she knows. They, plural, collective. An accusation levelled at a group, Poirot reflected, that happened to be travelling together on a train to Prague on a wet Thursday in October, a train from which there was, until Pardubice, no exit. A train on which a man had died without visible cause, without identification, without money, and with a single note that accused persons unknown of a crime undescribed. Hercule Poirot allowed himself a small, private smile. This, he thought, was a matter of real interest. Chapter 4. 6 persons, 6 silences. Poirot conducted his conversations in the dining car, 1 passenger at a time, with Inspector Hluchek present but silent at a table in the corner, taking notes with a discretion that Poirot appreciated. The arrangement was clear. Poirot asked, Hluchek listened, and no one was under any illusion that these were social exchanges. He began, by deliberate choice, with Douglas Ferris. Ferris sat across from him, with the relaxed confidence of a man who has been questioned before and found it manageable. He was, Poirot estimated, about 52, built like someone who had once been athletic and now maintained the infrastructure without vanity. He had wide-set eyes of a particularly clear grey and large, capable hands that he kept flat on the table before him, as though demonstrating their emptiness. "How did you know Colonel Roth?" Poirot asked. "I didn't," Ferris said pleasantly. "You did not know him at all?" "Not personally. By reputation, perhaps. He was a retired military man, Austrian army, I believe, before he settled in Salzburg. I read an article about him some years ago, in a defence publication." He paused. "Though I suppose I shouldn't admit to reading defence publications, should I? Makes me sound rather sinister. What are you by profession, Mr. Ferris?" "I'm in private security consulting. Have been for 15 years. Before that, British Army." He said this without pride or self-deprecation, as a simple taxonomic fact. "And your purpose in Prague?" "A client meeting. I consult for a manufacturing firm with facilities in the Czech Republic." He produced a business card with the smooth inevitability of a man who always has one ready. Poirot took it without looking at it. "You were in the corridor around 12:30 this morning, the steward says. Going to the bar car?" "That's right. Couldn't sleep. Never can on trains. Had a nightcap. Back in my compartment by 1:15. "Did you pass compartment 5? A brief pause. "Yes." "Did you notice anything?" "The door was closed. The light was off. Nothing to notice. And yet you noticed that the light was off. Ferris smiled, not quite caught, but acknowledging the precision of the observation. Force of habit. I notice things. Occupational necessity. Poirot thanked him pleasantly and moved on. Fedor Bloom, Ilse Hartmann's brother, was a man who filled a room with the anxious energy of someone who finds silence personally threatening. He talked rapidly, providing more information than was asked for, and seemed to regard every question as an opportunity to demonstrate his own harmlessness. He was, he said, a music publisher based in Vienna. He was travelling with his sister and brother-in-law because Ilse had insisted. Karl had business in Prague, and Ilse had found some pretext to make a family journey of it, though the atmosphere between husband and wife was, he admitted with visible discomfort, not ideal. He knew nothing about Colonel Roth, had never seen him before, was very sorry about his death but could not imagine what bearing it had on anyone in Car D. "Did your sister and her husband argue last night?" Poirot asked. Blum blinked. Yes. That is, I could hear them through the wall, but that is not unusual. They argue rather a lot. About what? I couldn't make out the words. It was late. I had my earplugs in by midnight. Ilse Hartmann came next. She was, up close, even more arresting than Poirot had noted at dinner. A woman of 40 or so, whose composure had been achieved at considerable personal cost, and was maintained with the discipline of someone who cannot afford to let it slip. Her eyes were very blue and very steady. "You and your husband argued last night," Poirot said, not as a question. "Married couples argue," she said, with the composed indifference of a woman for whom this observation contained no new information. "You did not sleep." "I slept. All night." A slight pause. "From about 1 until the screaming woke me." "And your husband?" "You must ask my husband." Poirot found Karl Hartmann the most interesting of all the subjects, because Hartmann was the most controlled. He answered every question with careful economy, volunteering nothing, conceding only what he calculated Poirot already knew or could easily determine. He admitted the argument with Ilse, a private disagreement, admitted to being dressed in the corridor, but explained it by saying he had intended to go to the bar car and changed his mind. He expressed appropriate regret about Colonel Roth. He claimed no prior acquaintance. But when Poirot asked, very casually, at the very end, in the manner of a man asking something of little importance, "Do you know Salzburg well, Mr. Hartmann?" something happened in Hartmann's eyes. A very small thing, a flicker of calibration, as though he were adjusting an instrument. "I have been there," he said, "on business." "Of course," Poirot said warmly. "It is a beautiful city." He thanked Hartmann and sat for a moment alone after the man had left, looking at his notebook, where he had written one additional word beside Hartmann's name. Lies. Chapter 5. What Madame Duroc Would Not Say. Celestine Duroc came to the dining car in the wine-red jacket she had worn to dinner, as though she had slept in it, which, Poirot suspected, she had not slept at all. She was, in daylight, older than she had appeared by lamplight. The skin around her eyes was fine and mapped with experience, and there was a tiredness to her that went deeper than the night's events. She sat across from Poirot and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the calm attention of a woman who has decided to be honest and is determining how much honesty to allocate. "You were a musician," Poirot said. "I am a musician," she corrected, with gentle firmness. "I was a concert violinist. I still teach, in Lyon. The distinction matters to me." "Of course. And Anselm Roth, you knew him." She was quiet for a moment. The train had begun to move again, Hluček having conferred with his superiors in Prague and established that the passengers could continue their journey while the investigation proceeded at the terminal. The countryside outside was flat and autumnal, copper-coloured under a white sky. "Yes," she said, "I knew him." "Well, once, long ago." She paused. "We were together, briefly, in the early 1980s. I was performing in Vienna. He was a young officer. It lasted perhaps 4 months. Then it was over. She said this without drama, as a completed narrative. And you had not seen him since. I had seen him once, about 3 years ago, at a concert in Salzburg. He was in the audience. We did not speak. He sent flowers to the dressing room afterward, with a card that said only, "Forgive me." Her voice was perfectly level. I sent the flowers back. "And yet you went to his compartment last night." She looked out the window. "I saw him at the station in Vienna, at the platform. He saw me too. I know he did." He turned away. But when I boarded and was shown to my compartment and realized he was on the same train, I thought that after 40 years, I was owed something. An explanation. Forgive me, madame. But an explanation for what? The pause before she answered was the longest in any of Poirot's interviews that morning. He did not fill it. He had learned, many years ago, that silence was among the most powerful investigative tools available to a man, that what people chose to say into a silence told you more than what they said in response to a question. He knew something, she said at last, about a man, a mutual friend, from that time, a man named Dominic Kessler. She looked at Poirot directly. Dominic died in 1983. He was found at the bottom of a cliff road outside Salzburg. The verdict was accident, but I never believed it was an accident. And Roth? Roth was there, in Salzburg that week. He and Dominic had quarrelled. Over what, I never fully knew, but I always believed he knew more than he told the investigators. She straightened slightly. When I went to his compartment, I did not intend to accuse him of anything. I merely wanted, after all this time, to know the truth. And instead, Poirot said softly, "You found him dead?" "Yes." "Was he warm when you found him? Did you touch him?" I touched his hand. Yes, he was still warm, not long dead. Poirot absorbed this. "Madame, the door was unlocked. Did you unlock it, or was it already unlocked?" "Already unlocked. I merely turned the handle." After she left, Poirot remained seated for a long time. He added to his notebook. He drew lines between names. He thought about Dominic Kessler, a man dead 42 years, who might or might not be relevant to anything. He thought about the sealed note in Roth's briefcase, the wallet that was missing, the 6 words in precise German handwriting. Then he thought about Miss Adela Novotna, who had been writing in her compartment at 4 in the morning, and who had not come to dinner, and who had not, as far as Poirot could determine, spoken a single word to any other passenger in Car D. He went to find her. Chapter 6. The Notebook and the Name. Miss Novotna received him without surprise, which surprised him. She had been expecting, it seemed, exactly this visit. She set her notebook aside, closing it with the deliberate movement of someone establishing a boundary, and looked at him with frank, assessing eyes. She was, Poirot now saw, older than he had initially estimated. 26 had been wrong. She was perhaps 31, and the dark circles he had noticed were not merely the product of a sleepless night, but of sustained and chronic exhaustion. "I know who you are," she said immediately, in excellent English. "I was going to find you myself this morning. Is that so, mademoiselle? I'm an investigative journalist. I have been for 6 years. I work for Respect magazine in Prague." She held his gaze steadily. "I have been investigating Colonel Anselm Roth for the past 14 months. In the window behind her, the Czech countryside rolled past in shades of ochre and grey. Poirot said nothing. "He wasn't just a retired soldier," she continued. "He was the former director of an intelligence liaison unit, Austrian military intelligence, but with strong ties to what remained of certain East German and Soviet networks after reunification. In the 1990s, he was involved, I believe, in the sale of classified military infrastructure data to private interests. Several people who threatened to expose this ended up dead or discredited." She paused. "I've been building a file for over a year. I knew he would eventually travel to Prague. My source indicated he was meeting someone there, someone willing to testify, so I followed him." You were on this train by design, Poirot said. Yes. And you did not think to inform anyone of this. I'm a journalist, Monsieur Poirot. I protect my sources. I observe, I don't announce myself. Poirot looked at her notebook, closed on the seat beside her. What is in there? Notes. 18 months of notes. Is there anything in there, he said gently, that might tell us who on this train had reason to want Anselm Roth dead before he reached Prague? She met his eyes, and in hers he saw not evasion but a kind of complex calculation, the weighing of professional obligation against the considerable weight of a man's unexplained death. Everyone in this car, she said at last, had reason to be in Vienna this week. I checked. There was a private financial conference, the Danube Investment Forum. It ran Tuesday and Wednesday. Carl Hartmann attended. So did Douglas Ferris, as a security consultant to one of the participating firms. She paused. Colonel Roth was originally scheduled to attend as well, but he cancelled at the last minute and boarded this train instead. Cancelled, Poirot murmured. And yet he came to the station and boarded at the last moment. Why? Because someone told him to, she said. That's what I believe. Someone changed his plans, arranged for him to be on this train. Someone who knew which train you would be on, Poirot asked. A pause, a small, uncomfortable pause. Yes, she said. Someone who knew I would be on this train. Poirot sat with this for a moment. Then, quite casually, the name Dominic Kessler. Do you know it? Something crossed her face. Brief, controlled, but real. Kessler was one of the names in my file. He died in 1983. He was a musician. He had connections to the same network. There were suggestions, unverified, that his death was not accidental. And the woman in the photograph in Roth's briefcase, Poirot said. Dark-haired, perhaps 40, in front of a garden wall in the south of France. Do you know her? Miss Novotná blinked. Then, that sounds like it could be Lucy Kessler, Dominic's daughter. She lives in Provence. She has also been looking into her father's death, independently. Poirot thanked her, rose, and paused at the door of the compartment. Mademoiselle, he said, from now until we reach Prague, I would ask you to be careful. She looked at him. You think it isn't over? I think, Poirot said, with the precise gravity of a man who has learned to take his own instincts seriously, that the reason Colonel Roth is dead is aboard this train, and the reason he is dead has not yet been fully accomplished. He left her to consider this, and went to stand in the corridor with his hands behind his back, watching the grey sky above the Czech plains, his mind arranged into its characteristic quiet order, and at the centre of that order, a small, rotating question that everything else orbited. Why had Anselm Roth left his briefcase unlocked? Chapter 7. The Architecture of Old Sins. Inspector Hluček, who had established his operational base in the service area between cars C and D, received Poirot's accumulated observations with the careful attention of a man who has learned that certain informants are worth their eccentricities. He relayed in return what Prague had confirmed overnight. Colonel Anselm Roth, real name, confirmed, retired 1999 from Austrian military service. One previous police inquiry in 2004 dropped for lack of evidence. Address, Salzburg. No criminal record. No outstanding warrants. The toxicology would not be complete until they reached Prague, but Fischerover's preliminary view, transmitted by telephone, had become more definite. The mottling of the lips and the lividity patterns were inconsistent with natural cardiac arrest. She was using the word suspicious and expected to use a different word, a more specific one, within 24 hours. Poirot asked Hluček to quietly obtain the luggage of all passengers for examination, not a search precisely, but an inventory of what was declared. He also asked whether it was possible to establish, without alerting the interested parties, the complete history of each passenger's movements through the car on the previous night. Holocek could do so, he believed, by reviewing what the steward and the conductor had observed, combined with a very discreet inspection of the corridor's surfaces. The train was old enough to retain impressions. The carpet, in particular, was a record of movement. It was André who provided, hesitantly, one additional piece of information that Poirot had not solicited, but immediately recognized as significant. "I should have said before," the steward told him, "in the service area with the door closed. At about 1:30 in the morning, maybe 1:25, I was bringing a bottle of mineral water through from the galley, and I thought I saw someone in the corridor by compartment 5, just for a moment, before they went into their compartment." "Which compartment?" "I couldn't see clearly, sir. It was dark. But it was one of the first compartments, 1, 2, or 3. Man or woman? I think a man. The build, but I was tired. I could be wrong." Poirot did not press him. He thanked him and thought. A man in the corridor near compartment 5 at 1:25. Celestine Duroc had arrived to find Roth dead at approximately 2:15. If the toxicology confirmed poisoning, the window was narrow, but broad enough. He returned to the dining car and sat with his notebook, reviewing what he had. 6 passengers, 1 dead man, 1 missing wallet, 1 sealed accusation, 1 journalist with a file of old sins, 1 French woman with a ghost named Kessler, 1 British security consultant who noticed the light in dead man's compartment, 1 financier dressed and wakeful at 2 in the morning, 1 music publisher with earplugs, 1 woman who endured her marriage with the quality of someone containing something larger than marriage. He looked at his watch. They were 90 minutes from Prague. He thought about what Miss Novotna had said. Someone who knew which train I would be on. He thought about the conference, the Danube Investment Forum. 3 passengers in his car had connection to it. Hartmann, Ferris, Roth. 3 men circling the same event. He thought about the note. They know what they have done. An accusation, but also, he now saw it differently, a warning. A note left for someone to find, not for the police, for a specific person. A person who might board the train and search the compartment before the body was discovered. A person who might remove the wallet, which would contain identification, business cards, connections, and fail to find the note because the note was inside a sealed envelope inside a briefcase, not in a wallet. Someone had come to compartment 5 before Celestine Duroc. Someone who had intended to leave no trace and had nearly succeeded. Poirot looked at his list of first impressions again. Ferris, Douglas, surveillance. A man in private security. A man who attended the Danube Investment Forum. A man who had been seen moving toward the bar car at 12:30 and who noticed, specifically, deliberately, that the light in compartment 5 was off. A man whose hands, when they lay flat on the table, were the hands of someone accustomed to doing things with precision and without evidence. Poirot underlined the word surveillance and looked at it for a long time. Then he added, beneath it, a second word, or execution. He closed his notebook and considered what he needed to know before Prague. He needed to know what was in Adela Novotna's file that she had not yet told him. He needed to know what Karl Hartmann's business in Prague actually was. He needed to know whether Douglas Ferris had any documented connection to Colonel Roth, beyond a vague familiarity with a journal article. And he needed to know, most urgently of all, what Ilse Hartmann had seen from her compartment window at 1 in the morning, when she had, as he was now certain, watched someone move along the corridor. Chapter 8. What the Wife Remembered. He found Ilse Hartmann alone in compartment 1, her husband absent, gone to speak with Holocek, according to André. She was sitting very straight in the window seat, looking out at a landscape that had flattened entirely now, the suburban margins of a large city beginning to assemble themselves at the horizon. She looked at him without surprise. She had, he thought, been expecting him to return. There are people who answer the question asked, and people who answer the question beneath the question. Ilse Hartmann had answered the question asked, precisely and completely, and had offered nothing beyond it, which meant she had saved what lay beneath for the moment when someone demonstrated they were capable of asking it. "Mrs. Hartmann," Poirot said, sitting across from her, "you were awake at 1 in the morning. You said you slept from 1 until the screaming woke you. But before 1, you were awake." "I said so, yes. And your husband was dressed and wakeful at 2:15. Therefore he had not slept either." She said nothing, which was confirmation. "They argued," Poirot said gently. "You and your husband. Not about an ordinary domestic matter, about what was on the train." Her hands, folded in her lap, tightened very slightly. "You are quite perceptive. Did your husband know Colonel Roth?" A long pause. The city was growing at the window. "Karl knew him from the 90s, she said at last. "He doesn't speak about it. He would tell you he barely remembered the man. But I know different." She turned from the window to look at Poirot directly, and in her eyes was the particular quality of a woman who has carried a heavy secret for a long time and has found, at last, someone she judges capable of taking its weight. Karl was involved. Peripherally, he always said peripherally, in the same financial network that Roth was connected to. The data sales, the intelligence trading. It was 15, 18 years ago. He assured me it was over. And last night you discovered it was not over. Last night I saw Karl's face when Roth boarded the train at Vienna. She paused. He went completely white. He didn't say anything. But I have been married to this man for 19 years, and I know his fear, Monsieur Poirot. I know exactly what his fear looks like. He was afraid of Colonel Roth. And the argument? I told him I wanted him to go and speak to Roth, to resolve it, whatever it was, to stop running from it. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. He refused. He told me there was nothing to resolve, that Roth was a ghost from the past and would remain so. I told him that if he would not deal with his past, I would deal with mine. And what does that mean, madame? She met his eyes. I have known about the network for 3 years. I have kept silent because I love my husband, or I believed I did. But there are limits to what love asks of a person. I had already, before we boarded this train, contacted a journalist. In Prague. She paused. A journalist named Novotná. The small, electric silence that followed was one of the most eloquent Poirot had experienced in a career of remarkable conversations. "You are Miss Novotná's source," he said. "I am one of them, yes. Not the only one. But I gave her documentation, bank records, meeting records, dates, places, names." She looked at him calmly, "including Roth's name, including Karl's name. Does your husband know?" "No, not yet." She looked out the window at Prague's outskirts with the expression of a woman who has climbed very high and is now looking down without regret. "But he will, when we arrive." Poirot sat very still for a moment. "Madame, when you were awake before 1 o'clock, did you see anything in the corridor? Anyone?" She looked at him. "I heard the door of our compartment open. About 1:15. I thought Karl was going to the bathroom, but he was gone for quite a long time. 20 minutes, perhaps. When he came back, he said nothing. He lay down in his clothes. He did not sleep." She paused. "I did not ask him where he had been. Because you were afraid of the answer?" "Because I was afraid," she said simply, "of what I might have to do with it." Poirot thanked her with genuine and complicated feeling and walked back through the corridor toward the dining car, past the closed door of compartment 5 where a dead man lay in his arranged stillness, past compartment 6 where Celestine Duroc sat with 40 years of grief, past compartment 7 where a journalist wrote toward a truth she had nearly paid for with her life. He passed compartment 3 and paused. Douglas Ferris was looking at him through the glass. Their eyes met. Ferris held the gaze for a moment, then looked away, not with guilt, but with the specific calculation of a man deciding something. Poirot walked on and thought, "It is time to set the stage." Chapter 9. The Gathering in the Dining Car. 40 minutes from Prague's main station, Poirot asked Inspector Hluček to gather everyone in the dining car. This was not, he explained to Hluček, in any sense an official proceeding. It was a conversation, an airing of facts. He had, he believed, a sufficient picture to require testing, and the best way to test a picture was to show it to the people it depicted and observe what broke. Hluček understood this. He also understood that Poirot's reputation made it likely that something useful would result, and that the alternative, allowing the passengers to disperse at Prague station before the toxicology was complete, was professionally unappealing. The dining car was arranged with its usual precision: amber lamps, white tablecloths. The rain had stopped, and the grey October light through the windows gave the room the quality of a stage set between scenes. The passengers filed in with the varying postures of the summoned. Fedor Blum, anxious and bright-eyed. Ilse Hartmann, composed. Karl Hartmann, with a controlled expression that was barely indistinguishable from composure. Douglas Ferris, with his hands in his jacket pockets. Celestine Duroc, with her scarf retied and her spine perfectly straight. And Adela Novotna, who looked at Poirot once with a swift, grateful intelligence, and then at the others with the careful non-expression of a woman memorizing a room. Poirot stood at the end of the car. He did not sit. He seldom sat when he was thinking clearly, despite what people assumed of him. "I am grateful to you all," he began, in his precise, slightly formal English, "for indulging an old Belgian's peculiarities. What I am about to say is based upon observation, inference, and certain facts that have come to my attention. Inspector Hluček will add anything of a legal or evidentiary nature at the appropriate moment." He paused. The train swayed gently. Prague was very close now. When Colonel Roth was found dead at 2:15 this morning, it appeared possible, initially, that he had died of natural causes. A man of 65, alone in a sleeping compartment. Possible, but not probable. He looked around the room. The preliminary medical examination suggests that Colonel Roth was poisoned. The method, we will confirm this in Prague, was almost certainly a substance introduced into the water carafe in his compartment. The carafe was provided at boarding, from the train's standard supply, but the substance was added afterward, and the carafe was removed before Madame Duroc arrived, which is why we found no glass, no container near the body. A silence settled over the car that was different from the silences of individual interviews. Denser, collective, harder to hide within. "The carafe," Ferris said, "has not been found," Poirot said, "because the person who administered the poison removed it. But the act of removal tells us something important. It tells us that the killer had time to act without hurry, that after ensuring Colonel Roth had consumed the water, they returned, waited, confirmed the death, removed the carafe, took the wallet, which contained identifying documents that might have told us things too quickly, and withdrew." When? Karl Hartmann's voice was perfectly steady. "Between 1:15 and 1:45, approximately. A window of 30 minutes. Poirot looked at him. A window during which several people were unaccounted for. He let that sit for a moment, then continued. "Colonel Roth was coming to Prague to meet someone, a witness, someone willing to testify about activities that he and others had engaged in during the 1990s, the trading of classified intelligence data, activities that, if exposed, would result in criminal proceedings against several individuals." He paused. At least one person in this car knew of that meeting, knew that if Roth reached Prague, and that testimony was given, their own history would become visible. The train slowed perceptibly. The first Prague suburbs were filing past the windows. The note in Roth's briefcase, "They know what they have done," was not, as I initially considered, an accusation written by Roth against others. It was written to Roth, by the person he was going to meet, a warning that there were people who knew and who were prepared to speak. Celestine Duroc said, very quietly. Lucy Kessler. Lucy Kessler, Poirot confirmed. Dominic Kessler's daughter, who has spent many years establishing what happened to her father in 1983, a death that was not an accident, as Madame Duroc suspected, but was arranged by the same network that Roth served. Lucy Kessler sent that note to Roth as an act of courage. It reached him in Vienna. It changed his plans. He boarded this train not because he was summoned by an ally, but because he was terrified. He was going to run, Miss Novotná said. He was going to run, Poirot agreed. He was not going to Prague to testify. He was going to Prague to disappear. But someone on this train discovered that Roth had been contacted by Lucy Kessler, that he possessed information that, in the wrong hands, was catastrophic, and decided that he must not arrive at all. Chapter 10. The Unravelling of Douglas Ferris. The train's deceleration was now fully apparent. The platform lights of Praha Hlavní nádraží were visible in the distance, amber and white, the great iron and glass vault of the station approaching through the damp morning. Mr. Ferris, Poirot said. The room turned to look at Douglas Ferris, who did not look away from Poirot. You are not, as you presented yourself, a private security consultant attending a client meeting in Prague, Poirot said, with the quiet, even tone of someone stating something they have known for some time. You are a man engaged, until very recently, in exactly the same kind of covert financial work that involved Colonel Roth. You attended the Danube Investment Forum not as a consultant but as a participant, representing interests that connect directly to the network Roth built in the 90s. That's quite an accusation, Ferris said. His voice was calm, his hands were still. It is not an accusation, it is a description, Poirot said pleasantly. Miss Novotná's file, which I have not personally read, but of which I am aware, contains your name. She has been careful to tell me very little directly, but she confirmed one thing that was essential. Among the names in her file, connected to the Roth network's financial operations, was a British security professional with military background. He paused. There is only one such person in this car. I see, Ferris said. You attended the conference. You learned there, from a contact or by other means, that Roth had received the Kessler note, that he was destabilized, that he was considering running rather than fighting, and running meant he might bargain, might offer names, your name. Poirot's voice was entirely without drama, which made it considerably more effective. You boarded this train. You had, if I am not mistaken, specific information about who would be aboard, including Miss Novotná, whose investigation you were aware of through your network. A long pause. The station was very close. The water carafe, Poirot said. You carried the substance, a tasteless, rapid-acting agent of the kind known to military intelligence communities, in the small medical kit you reported for customs declaration as standard travel first aid. You went to compartment 5 at approximately 1:15 in the morning. Roth was still awake. Frightened men do not sleep easily, and let you in because you told him you had information about his Kessler problem. You offered to help. He drank from the carafe you had doctored. You waited until you were certain, removed the carafe and the wallet, and withdrew. Proving any of that, Ferris said, would be extremely difficult. The carafe, Poirot said, is in your luggage. A very brief silence. You could not remove it from the train, Poirot continued, and destroying it without risk was not possible in a moving train with other passengers awake. You wrapped it, I believe in a soft garment, and placed it in the center of your bag, which you have kept in your compartment and not left unattended since this morning. Inspector Hluček rose from his table in the corner and spoke to the officer who had been standing at the far end of the car throughout. Ferris looked at Poirot. His calm was entirely real, not performance, not denial, but the settled composure of a man who has done what he came to do and accepted the consequences as theoretical quantities to be managed. You have extraordinary instincts, he said. I'll grant you that. "It is not instinct," Poirot said. "It is the little grey cells. They are very reliable." When the officer opened Ferris's bag, the carafe was there, wrapped in a grey wool sweater, stowed precisely, as Poirot had said, in the centre. Ferris said nothing more. He was taken to the end of the dining car, where he sat with a composure that Poirot found, on reflection, more disturbing than outrage would have been. It was the composure of a man for whom this was an occupational eventuality, rather than a personal catastrophe. Carl Hartmann, who had been white since the word name appeared in connection with the network, now sat very still and looked at his hands and said nothing. Ilse beside him did not look at him at all. The Edelweiss Express rolled into Praha Hlavní nádraží at 9:47, 43 minutes behind schedule, a fact that Hercule Poirot, emerging onto the platform into the pale Prague morning, noted with resigned disapproval. Chapter 11. The Small Pieces. The hours that followed at the station were administrative rather than investigative, but Poirot observed them with patience. Douglas Ferris was taken into Czech police custody. His luggage was inventoried, and the carafe found to contain traces of a synthetic compound. Hluček's men relayed this from the forensic team that met the train, consistent with a class of agents known in intelligence communities as cardiac mimics, substances that replicate the presentation of sudden cardiac arrest in persons over 60 with any degree of underlying cardiovascular history. The substance was not widely available. It required access to a particular kind of supply chain. It was, in other words, professional. Ferris's real name, they would discover, was not Ferris at all, but this would take longer to establish. What was established at the station were two things: that his British passport was authentic, but his professional history was, at significant points, fabricated, and that his communications in the 3 days before boarding the train included encrypted messages to a number in Vienna that the Czech intelligence service recognized with the interested attention of professionals encountering an old adversary. Adela Novotná spoke to Inspector Hluček for 2 hours at the station. She produced, from her leather notebook, a document that she had kept folded at the back cover, 3 pages of handwritten summary connecting the Roth network to specific transactions and the names of 9 individuals. Ferris was on it. So was Carl Hartmann, though in a lesser capacity. The Czech authorities would spend months with what she gave them. Carl Hartmann was asked to remain in Prague voluntarily, which he agreed to with the mechanical compliance of a man who has decided that cooperation is the only available dignity. Ilse sat beside him during this conversation and said nothing but held his hand, which Poirot found unexpectedly moving, the particular tenderness of a woman who has chosen to remain with someone at the moment when remaining costs the most. Celestine Duroc gave a formal statement about Dominic Kessler's death in 1983, which the Czech investigators promised to relay to their Austrian counterparts. It was not certain that anything could be established at this remove, but it was something. She had been carrying it for 42 years and was visibly relieved, in a way that was difficult to articulate, to have set it down. Fedor Blum, who had played no role in any of it beyond that of anxious bystander, gave his statement with extraordinary cooperation and excessive detail and was released by noon. He went directly to a cafe near the station and telephoned, from the evidence of his expression when he emerged, someone who listened to everything he said with the patience of deep affection. Miss Novotná was the last to leave the station. She shook Poirot's hand at the exit, a firm, direct handshake, and looked at him with the clear eyes of someone who has accomplished what she came to do, despite everything that tried to prevent her. "Lucy Kessler," she said. "She'll want to know." "Yes," Poirot agreed. "Someone should tell her that her father has been, in some small measure, answered." "I'll go to Provence. I thought you might." She smiled briefly, the first smile he had seen from her, and entirely convincing, and walked through the station doors into the Prague morning. Poirot stood in the station concourse for a moment, beneath its soaring glass and iron ceiling, with his coat buttoned and his hat correctly placed, and his hands in his gloves, and allowed himself the particular quiet satisfaction of a finished thing. A man was dead. That was not satisfying. The death of any person, however compromised, was a diminishment of something, and Poirot did not celebrate it. But the ordering of the chaos that the death had created, the restoration of clarity from confusion, that he permitted himself to feel. One small thing remained, which he attended to by finding a telegraph office, an increasingly rare institution, and sending a message to a hotel in Provence, addressed to a Mademoiselle L. Kessler, care of the proprietor. The matter is resolved. The truth, imperfectly, has been established. A journalist named Novotna will visit you. She is entirely trustworthy. H. Poirot. He did not know whether this would reach her. He did not know whether imperfect truth was sufficient consolation for 42 years of unanswered silence. But it was what was possible, and Poirot had long since made his peace with the distinction between the possible and the ideal. Ooh! Chapter 12. Poirot and Hluchek at the window. Inspector Hluchek found Poirot in a small café opposite the station at 2 in the afternoon, with a tisane and a slice of vietanique, the cream-filled pastry that he had decided to consider a reasonable approximation of something he might ordinarily eat, and a view of the street that satisfied his preference for watching without being watched. Hluchek sat down and ordered coffee, and looked at Poirot with the expression of a man who has one remaining question. "The note," he said. "Roth's briefcase. They know what they have done. You said it was from Kessler's daughter to Roth. But Roth wrote it. The handwriting was his." "Ah," Poirot said. He put down his pastry. "Yes, that is the small subtlety that I confess took me the longest to resolve." Hluchek waited. "Roth received a message from Lucy Kessler," Poirot said. "But not in writing. By telephone, or perhaps in person. We may never know. The message she conveyed was that she knew what he and the others had done, that she had proof, that she was ready to speak." He paused. "Roth's response to this was not, as I initially thought, flight. It was not entirely flight in any case. He was, I believe, a man of late conscience, a man who had spent 30 years trying not to think about Dominic Kessler, and had found that the effort of not thinking was eventually more exhausting than the alternative. He was going to confess. He was considering it. The note was not written to or by anyone in particular. It was written by Roth, to himself, as a kind of reckoning. They know what they have done. He was one of the they. It was his own acknowledgement. Poirot looked at his tisane, a man preparing himself for the truth he has avoided. Hluchek was quiet for a moment. Ferris knew this. Ferris discovered that Roth had been contacted by Kessler's daughter and had not immediately acted to suppress it, which was the expected response from someone in Roth's position. The delay told Ferris that Roth was wavering, and a wavering Roth was far more dangerous than a compliant one. Poirot nodded. So Ferris came to him, presented himself as an ally, and helped Roth waver permanently. Hluchek drank his coffee. Outside, Prague's afternoon traffic moved past in the grey light. "You knew it was Ferris before we gathered them in the dining car." "I suspected it was Ferris since the corridor conversation," Poirot said. "But I needed to establish two things, the carafe and the motive. The motive came from Mrs. Hartmann. The carafe, I did not know for certain it was in his luggage, but it was the logical solution, and the logical solution, in my experience, is usually correct." He smiled slightly. "Usually. And if it hadn't been there, then I would have been very embarrassed," Poirot said, with complete seriousness, "and would have required considerable time to reconsider." Hluchek laughed, a brief, genuine sound, and they sat in companionable silence for a while, two professionals at the end of a concluded thing. "The Hartmann matter," Hluchek said eventually. "A matter for your prosecutors rather than for me," Poirot said. But I think you will find that Mrs. Hartman's cooperation and her documentation will prove valuable. The husband is not, I think, an evil man. He is a weak man who made bad choices early in life and then spent decades containing the consequences. The containing itself became his life. It is a sad way to spend a life. And Madame Duroc. Poirot was quiet for a moment. I hope, he said, that she plays Dvořák this evening, that she finds a concert hall or simply an empty room and plays something. She has, I think, been carrying too much for too long, and music is a better container for old grief than silence is. Hluček regarded him with the slightly surprised expression of a practical man encountering an unexpectedly philosophical remark. Poirot finished his tisane and examined the empty cup. "There is one thing that will stay with me from this case," he said. "What is that?" "The wallet. Ferris took it because it contained evidence. Papers, documents, cards. Things that would connect Roth to a world that Ferris preferred to keep invisible. He took it instinctively, as the trained professional does." Poirot set the cup down, but he left the briefcase. He saw the envelope and thought, a sealed letter, correspondence. Nothing useful. He left it. He looked at Hluček with the gentle precision of someone identifying a lesson. The criminal mind, however professional, makes assumptions. And assumptions are always the weakest architecture in any plan. Chapter 13. Letters and Departures. Poirot had arranged to spend 2 nights in Prague, at the Aria Hotel, where he had stayed before, and where the rooms were quiet and the breakfast acceptable. He used the afternoon to write 2 letters, one to Dr. Vanbury, whose mysterious summons had ultimately brought Poirot to the right train at the right moment, and one to an old friend in London who kept records of his cases and who would want the particulars. The letter to Vanbury was brief. He explained what had occurred, expressed thanks for the inadvertent role Vanbury's invitation had played, and mentioned that he would be happy to discuss criminological methodology with the doctor at some future date, provided the date was convenient and the case did not involve overnight train journeys. The letter to London was considerably longer. In it, he wrote about the case with his characteristic thoroughness, the closed setting of the sleeping car, the circle of suspects, the layering of old sins beneath the immediate crime. He wrote about what the case had demonstrated regarding the longevity of guilt, how actions taken 30 or 40 years ago could arrange themselves, eventually, into a pattern that became inescapable. Roth, Ferris, Hartman, men who had made choices in the 90s, expecting to profit without consequence, and who had discovered, in gradations, that consequence was merely patient. He wrote about Celestine Duroc, and about the way grief, left unresolved for decades, could remain as fresh and specific as an open wound. He wrote about Adela Novotná with something close to admiration, which he expressed with his characteristic understatement, a persistent and capable woman who understands that the truth requires not only intelligence but tenacity. He wrote about Ilse Hartmann's particular courage, the courage of someone who looks clearly at a person they love and chooses, at great cost to themselves, to stop protecting them from their own history. He did not write about Douglas Ferris at length. There was, he found, relatively little to say about Ferris that was interesting. He was competent, he was professional, he was entirely without what Poirot considered the minimum necessary quality for a fully human life, the capacity to feel, in any authentic sense, the consequences of one's actions in other people's lives. Ferris had killed Roth with the same emotional register with which one might cancel an appointment. This was efficient, and it was terrifying, and it was, in the end, less interesting than almost any of the other people on that train, because it reduced a human being to a mechanism. Poirot preferred humans, even the flawed ones, especially the flawed ones. He sealed the letters and went for a walk through the Malastrana district. The 3 locations on Roth's Prague map had been identified. The hotel where the witness was to have been met, the street address of Lucy Kessler's Prague contact, and the central station, a geography of intentions now rendered historical. He walked through the narrow baroque streets in the afternoon light, which had turned golden and autumnal, with the Vltava glinting between the buildings and the city arranged around him in its centuries-old complexity, and thought about the nature of closed circles. The mystery of the locked room, or in this case the unlocked room, was always in some sense the same mystery, the mystery of how a human being justifies to themselves the decision to end another's life. Poirot had never made his peace with this. He had investigated enough murders to know that the justifications were various and occasionally comprehensible, but he had never managed to find them sufficient. He was not, he supposed, a man of the world in the sense that required the suspension of moral judgment. He judged. He did so privately, and without cruelty, but he judged. Ferris had killed Roth to protect a financial interest and a personal freedom. The motive was as old as crime itself. What made it interesting, what elevated it from the merely sordid, was the architecture of the past that had made it necessary. 30 years of choices, each one begetting the next, until the final choice was not a choice at all, but an inevitability. A man trapped by the compound interest of his own history. Poirot sat for a while in a small garden square in the Malastrana, with the last sun on his face and the sounds of the city arranged around him, and was quiet. He thought about the orderliness of justice, its slowness, its imperfection, its occasional accuracy. He thought about Lucy Kessler, whom he had never met, who had spent years moving toward a truth that had now, imperfectly, arrived. He thought about the journalist on the train to Prague, writing in the dark while a man died 3 doors away, writing toward the same truth from a different direction. The sun moved, the square quieted. Poirot rose, settled his coat, straightened his hat, and walked back toward his hotel for dinner, which was, he had been told, exceptionally good. He was satisfied, with the modest and responsible satisfaction appropriate to work well done, nothing more and nothing less. Chapter 14. The Grey Cells. Rested on the morning of his departure from Prague, Hercule Poirot sat at the desk in his hotel room and reviewed his notes with the systematic thoroughness that had characterized his professional life for 4 decades. He was, he reflected, not as young as he had been. The late nights and the cold corridors and the particular mental effort of holding 6 people's contradictions simultaneously in mind had cost him more than they once had. He did not find this troubling. Age was simply another form of information, and information, properly organized, was always useful. He reviewed the case from the beginning and looked for anything he might have missed or misweighted. Roth's death, confirmed by the Prague Forensic Service as poisoning by synthetic cardiac agent. Time of death established at approximately 1:30 to 1:50, consistent with Ferris's movements. The carafe had been tested, and traces found on both the interior and on a cloth used to handle it that had been recovered from Ferris's bag alongside the wrapped carafe. Ferris's identity, established as Thomas Andrew Calloway, British national, age 54, with documented connections to private intelligence firms operating in Eastern Europe from 1996 through 2009. His association with the Roth network was being established by Czech and Austrian authorities jointly, with input from a British intelligence liaison who had, Hluček told Poirot by telephone that morning, been aware of Calloway for some time and was not entirely displeased to see him in custody. Karl Hartmann had retained a lawyer and was cooperating in exchange for reduced exposure. His role in the network had been primarily financial, a conduit for investment funds with deliberately obscured provenance, rather than operational. This distinction would matter in court. Lucy Kessler. Adela Novotna had telephoned from a train to Lyon. She was stopping to see Celestine Duroc first, which Poirot found wholly appropriate, to say that she had contacted Lucy Kessler and that the woman had wept, quietly and for some time, upon hearing what had been confirmed. Her father's death would be the subject of a formal reinvestigation. Whether anything would result from this was uncertain. But uncertainty was not the same as impossibility, and the establishment of the truth, even partial, imperfect, late, was not nothing. Poirot closed his notebook. He thought, as he sometimes permitted himself to do at the conclusion of a case, about what it meant, not the legal meaning, which was Hloček's domain, but the human meaning, what the case illustrated about the way people lived and the choices they made, and the long, inescapable consequences of those choices. The Edelweiss Express had carried, in a single sleeping car on a single October night, an extraordinary concentration of connected histories: Roth and his past, Ferris and his profession, Hartmann and his compromises, Ilse and her courage, Celestine and her grief, Adela and her persistence, Fedor, bewildered and innocent, merely human, all of them arriving at the same point in the same corridor by the operation of history working itself toward conclusion. There were those who maintained that such convergences were coincidental. Poirot did not believe in coincidence. He believed in causality, in the long, traceable chains of cause and effect that connected a decision made in a Salzburg apartment in 1983 to a dead man on a train in the Czech Republic in October. Everything that happened was the consequence of something that had happened before. The detective's work was simply the work of tracing the chain far enough back to find the link that should not have been forged. He thought about Ferris, Thomas Calloway, and the confidence he had exhibited, the assumption that Poirot would not find the carafe, the assumption that Poirot's conclusion, if it came, would come too late or be too unprovable to act upon. Assumptions, the thinnest material with which to construct a plan. He thought about the note. They know what they have done. Roth had written it, in the end, to himself. A man taking his own measure at the last possible moment. It was not a comfortable document, but it was a human one. Poirot packed his small travelling case with the same precision with which he always packed it, each object in its assigned position, the sequence unchanged from the sequence established 30 years ago, because habit and system were the foundations of clear thought, and he saw no reason to alter what worked. He closed the case. He checked his reflection in the mirror, coat brushed, moustaches attended to, hat perfectly placed. He was, as always, entirely himself. This was not vanity. It was a professional necessity. Hercule Poirot worked best when Hercule Poirot was precisely and completely present, and so he maintained himself with the same care he brought to everything else, as a form of respect for the work and for the people the work was meant to serve. Downstairs, the hotel concierge had arranged his taxi to the airport. Poirot descended, thanked the staff with specific and genuine gratitude. He remembered the names of the receptionist and the breakfast waiter and the porter, because people who were not remembered were diminished by the failure, and stepped out into the Prague morning. It was cold and clear and beautiful in the way of northern European cities in late October, when the light is horizontal and specific and makes everything look precisely itself. The Charles Bridge was visible from the hotel entrance, its baroque saints arrayed against a sky of sharp blue. Poirot stood for a moment, breathing the cold air, with the knowledge that he would not return to Prague for some time, perhaps not at all. This did not sadden him. He had been many places and would be many more, or would not, and both possibilities were within the range of acceptable outcomes for a man who had lived as fully as he had. He got into the taxi and gave the airport address and settled back with his case on the seat beside him, and allowed himself the luxury of thinking about nothing in particular, which was, for Hercule Poirot, a form of happiness. The case was closed. 6 passengers had boarded the Edelweiss Express in Vienna, with secrets of varying significance. 1 had died. 1 was in custody. 1 would face his history in a Prague courtroom. 1 had, after 42 years, set down a weight she had carried half her life. One would write the truth in a magazine read by people who still believed truth could change things, and she would be right. And one, a small, neat, carefully dressed Belgian, with an exceptional mind and a genuine affection for the complexity of human beings, was in a taxi in Prague on his way home. The little grey cells had done their work. They were, as always, satisfied. The end.